In an age of kings and emperors, the real masters of Europe weren't born into power, they bought it. Were bankers who turned debt into a weapon against popes and kings. They bankrolled the masterpieces of Michelangelo, yet they weren't above plotting murder in the sacred shadows of Florence's cathedral. For 3 centuries, one family didn't just rule Florence. They wrote the playbook for modern power, proving that gold could buy more than just things it could, buy you a piece of immortality. This is the story of the Medici. They were the architects of the Renaissance, but their blueprint was drawn with blood, ambition, and absolutely ruthless strategy. Their rise began with a single, audacious gamble, and it left a legacy that shaped the world we live in today. So how did one banking family from Tuscany turn a city-state into the cultural and financial epicenter of the world? How did they manage to control popes, kings, and the money of Europe, all while navigating betrayals that would make Shakespeare look tame? And in the end, what was the ultimate price of their power? The story of the Medici doesn't start in a palace. It starts in the humble wool trade of the Tuscan countryside, a region called Mugello. They weren't nobles, they weren't knights. Their roots were in the engine of Florence's new economy, the market, while other great families claimed descent from feudal lords. The Medici name likely hinted at a more practical origin, a doctor or an apothecary in the family tree. And this separation from the old landed aristocracy would turn out to be their greatest weapon. They understood a new kind of power, one not measured in territory, but in Florence. The gleaming gold coins of Florence. The man who architected this new power was Giovanni de' Medici. Born in 1360, Giovanni wasn't a visionary artist or a dashing warrior. He was something far more dangerous, a quiet, calculating, and unbelievably shrewd businessman. He started in a junior role at his cousin's bank, learning the complex dance of European finance from the ground up. He saw that in a world of warring princes and ambitious popes, everyone needed money. And the one loaning the money? He held the real power. After marrying into a good family, Giovanni used the dowry to open his own small bank in Florence in 1397. He didn't invent banking, but he perfected it like an artist. The Medici Bank used and refined techniques that became the bedrock of modern finance. They used double-entry bookkeeping, tracking every debit and credit with brutal clarity. They also set up a network of branch offices in key European cities, like London and Geneva. But with a brilliant twist, each branch was a separate partnership. This was a revolutionary way to manage risk. If one branch failed from a bad loan or political chaos, it wouldn't drag the entire Medici Bank down with it. It was a financial firewall. But Giovanni? His true masterstroke? The move that took his family from just rich to world-changing was his pursuit of the most powerful and most indebted client on earth, the papacy. The Catholic Church was Europe's biggest multinational corporation, collecting money from every corner of Christendom. Moving that much wealth was risky. Giovanni saw an opportunity. Becoming the Pope's banker was a high-stakes gamble. Back the wrong guy in a papal civil war, and you'd be ruined. Giovanni backed the right one. He forged a bond with a former pirate-turned-cardinal named Baldassare Cosa. When Cosa was elected Pope John XXIII, he rewarded Giovanni's loyalty. The Medici Bank became the manager of papal finances, and suddenly, a flood of capital poured through their books. They earned a handsome commission on every church tax collected across Europe. This holy alliance also gave them a crucial shield. The church called usury lending money for entrust a mortal sin, but as bankers to the Pope, the Medici got creative. They offered discretionary deposits, where a cardinal could leave money and later receive a gift that just so happened to equal a generous annual return. They disguised interest as currency exchange fees or by marking up the price of goods sold to the church. It was financial genius, blessed by the very institution that outlawed it. Unlike the showy nobles of Florence, Giovanni was deliberately humble. He dressed plainly, kept a low profile, and gave his sons one key piece of advice: stay out of the public eye and let your wealth do the talking. It was a strategy of ruling from the shadows, a lesson his descendants would forget at their own peril. Giovanni didn't want to be a king. He was happy being the king's banker. It was safer and ultimately much more powerful. He had laid the foundation. Now, his son would build the empire. When Giovanni de' Medici died in 1429, he left his son, Cosimo de' Medici, a gigantic fortune in that single potent piece of advice: stay a private citizen. Cosimo was about to face a crisis that would force him to rewrite the family rules. Born in 1389, he had a passion for art and philosophy, but he'd inherited his father's iron will and financial genius. He knew wealth was a tool, and he was about to use it to become the secret master of Florence. Florence was proud of being a republic, governed by committees with short terms to stop any one man from getting too powerful. In reality, it was an oligarchy run by a few powerful families. The most powerful were the Albizzi old nobles, who saw the Medici's new money as a mortal threat. Rinaldo degli Albizzi watched as Cosimo used his fortune to build a network of loyal clients and allies, and he knew Cosimo wasn't just buying influence, he was buying Florence itself. The conflict boiled over in 1433. The Albizzi-controlled government arrested Cosimo, blaming him for a failed war. He was locked in a small cell in the tower of the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of government, while his enemies called for his execution. For weeks, Cosimo's life hung in the balance. He refused to eat, fearing poison, surviving on scraps from a trusted guard. But while he was locked away, his money was busy. He bribed his jailers and key members of the city council. The death sentence was changed to banishment. For the Albizzi, it was a victory. For Cosimo, it was a strategic retreat. He and his bank simply moved to Venice, taking their immense capital with them. Suddenly, Florence discovered that by exiling its top banker, it had exiled its own economy. Business stalled. Credit vanished. The city ground to a halt. Out! Less than a year later, the same people who had celebrated Cosimo's fall were now demanding his return. In 1434, a new pro-Medici government revoked the banishment. Cosimo's return wasn't just a comeback, it was a triumph. The lesson was clear: Florence needed the Medici more than the Medici needed Florence. He now understood his father's advice to stay in the shadows was no longer enough. To be safe, he had to be in control. But he'd do it his way, without a crown or a formal title. A future pope described Cosimo's method perfectly. Political questions are settled in his house. The man he chooses holds office. He decides peace and war. He is king in all but name. Cosimo mastered the art of invisible rule. He rarely held office himself, but he made sure only men loyal to him could. He manipulated elections, controlled state finances, and even used the tax system, the catasto, as a weapon, bankrupting his enemies with crushing taxes while rewarding his allies. He kept the illusion of a republic alive, but behind the scenes, he was pulling every string. Cosimo's true genius, though, was his grasp of soft power. He launched a campaign of cultural patronage so huge it would literally spark a new age. He poured an estimated 600,000 gold Florenza sum that could be worth $500 million today into art, architecture, and learning. He commissioned the architect Brunelleschi to complete the magnificent, seemingly impossible dome of the Florence Cathedral. He funded the sculptor Donatello, created the first freestanding nude bronze statue since ancient times, the Defiant David. This wasn't just about loving art, it was a masterclass in public relations. Every chapel, sculpture, and monastery was a monument to the glory of God, the greatness of Florence, and not so subtly the power and piety of the Medici family. It bought them goodwill, popular support, and a kind of legitimacy no election could provide. He also sponsored scholars and founded the Florentine Platonic Academy, a think tank dedicated to reviving the philosophy of Plato. Cosimo wasn't just shaping the skyline of Florence. He was shaping the ideas of the Renaissance. By the time he died in 1464, the city he ruled in secret gave him the official title Pater Patria, Father of the Fatherland. The humble banker had become the uncrowned king, building his throne not from iron but from gold and marble. The mantle of power passed briefly to Cosimo's son, Piero, known as the Gouty for the painful illness that crippled him. Piero was capable, but his time was short. When he died in 1469, the family in Florence itself fell to his eldest son, a charismatic 20-year-old who would personify the peak of Medici glory. His name was Lorenzo. History would know him as Il Magnificoso, magnificent. Lorenzo was a new kind of Medici, He didn't have his great-grandfather's banking instincts or his grandfather's quiet patience. In fact, the family bank began a slow decline under his watch. But what he lacked in bookkeeping, he more than made up for in charm, intelligence, and a deep understanding of power. He was a poet, a scholar, a brilliant diplomat, and a true connoisseur of beauty, the Renaissance prince in the flesh. Under Lorenzo, Florence became the cultural capital of the Western world. It was more than a patron, it was a talent scout. He discovered a fiery young sculptor named Michelangelo and brought him into the Medici palace to live as one of the family. He sponsored artists like Sandro Botticelli and Andrea del Verrocchio, whose workshop included a promising apprentice named Leonardo da Vinci. Lorenzo even used his influence to help these artists get commissions to decorate the Sistine Chapel in Rome, a diplomatic move to strengthen an alliance with the Pope. For him, art was a tool of the state, a way to project Florentine genius and Medici power across Italy. But under all this glittering gold, old rivalries were rotting. The Medici's total dominance had made them enemies, and none were more bitter than the Pazzi family. The Pazzi were also powerful bankers who hated that the Medici had a monopoly on both political power and, for a time, the lucrative PayPal accounts. Their hatred found a powerful ally in Pope Sixtus IV, who saw Lorenzo as an obstacle to his own ambitions. When Lorenzo blocked the Pope's attempt to install a loyalist as the Archbishop of Pisa, the stage was set for a conspiracy. The Pope gave his quiet blessing, stating that while he couldn't sanction murder, removing the Medici would be a great benefit to the papacy. The plan was as simple as it was sacrilegious: assassinate Lorenzo and his popular younger brother, Giuliano, and seize control of the government. The moment? Easter Sunday, April 26, 1478, the place. The heart of Florence, the cathedral, during High Mass. As the priest raised the host, the most sacred moment of the service, the killer struck. Two priests went for Lorenzo, while Francesco de Pazzi and another conspirator lunged at Giuliano. Giuliano was stabbed 19 times, a frenzy of violence that left him dead on the marble floor. Lorenzo, however, was faster. Wounded in the neck, he drew his sword, wrapped his cloak around his arm as a shield, and fought his way into the sacristy, barricading the heavy bronze doors behind him. Outside, the coup was already falling apart. Another group of plotters tried to take over the Palazzo Vecchio, but were so clumsy they were quickly captured. One of the Pazzi rode through the streets crying liberty, expecting the people to rise up against the Medici. Instead, they rose up for them. Enraged, Medici loyalists hunted the conspirators through the city, with the family's rallying cry, "Pal, Pal," echoing through the streets. Lorenzo's revenge was a masterclass in terror. It was swift and brutally public. Francesco de Pazzi was dragged from his bed and hanged naked from a window of the Palazzo Vecchio. Next to him swung the corpse of Archbishop Salviati, still in his formal robes. For days, the main square became a stage for savage retribution. Anyone tied to the plot was hunted down, their bodies torn apart by the mob, or left dangling from the palace windows. The Pazzi family was effectively destroyed. The Pazzi conspiracy was a bloody turning point. It transformed Lorenzo from the city's popular first citizen into its absolute master. The attack designed to destroy him had instead cemented his authority in blood and popular support. He was no longer just Cosimo's grandson. He was Il Magnifico, the survivor, the avenger, the symbol of Florentine power. He had stared down his enemies, and even a pope, and won. The Golden Age would continue, but now on a foundation of unquestioned, ruthless power. For all his magnificence, Lorenzo de' Medici couldn't stop time. His later years were spent brilliantly keeping the fragile peace in Italy. But his health was failing, much like his family's bank. He died in 1492, at just 43 years old. With him died an era of stability. His successor was his eldest son, Piero, a man who inherited the Medici name, but none of the talent. He's known to history as Piero the Unfortunate. As the light of the Medici Renaissance began to dim, a dark shadow fell over Florence. It belonged to a Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola. Savonarola was a man of terrifying piety and magnetic charisma. He railed against the city's sin and luxury, seeing the Medici and their humanist court as the source of the corruption. His sermons were apocalyptic visions of fire and brimstone, and his prophecies of doom captivated a city anxious about its future. The storm Savonarola predicted arrived in 1494 as the French army King Charles VIII of France marched into Italy, and his path led straight to Florence. Piero the Unfortunate panicked. Without consulting his own government, he rode out and surrendered the region's key fortresses. It was a total humiliation. When the news hit Florence, the city exploded with rage. Inflamed by Savonarola's sermons, the people saw Piero's weakness as divine judgment. The Medici rulers for 60 years were declared enemies of the Republic. A mob descended on the Medici palace, and Piero and his brothers were forced to flee for their lives. The Medici were once again in exile. Florence now belonged to Savonarola. He established what was essentially a theocracy. The cradle of the Renaissance was plunged into an age of austere fanaticism. Savonarola's followers, nicknamed the Piagnoni, or Weepers, enforced a rigid moral code. But it was too late. The Medici Pope, in his quest to build a glorious church and fund a magnificent lifestyle, had accidentally shattered Western Christendom and triggered the Protestant Reformation. The family's hold on the papacy didn't stop there. After Leo's death, his cousin Giulio de' Medici, the illegitimate son of Lorenzo's murdered brother, Giuliano, became Pope Clement VII in 1523. But his reign was a total disaster, culminating in the horrifying sack of Rome in 1527 by mutinous imperial troops. The Medici had conquered the papacy, but in doing so, had unleashed forces far beyond their control. This crusade against worldliness peaked with the infamous bonfire of the Vanities. On Shrove Tuesday, 1497, a giant pyramid of sinful objects was built in the city's main square. Onto it went mirrors, cosmetics, lavish dresses, secular books, and musical instruments. Most tragically, great works of art were thrown into the flames. It's said that Sandro Botticelli himself, once a favorite of Lorenzo, was swept up in the fervor and willingly burned some of his own mythological paintings. But Savonarola's extremism couldn't last. His claim to be a divine prophet and his constant attacks on the corrupt Pope Alexander VI made him a powerful enemy in Rome. Pope Alexander excommunicated him in 1497. At the same time, Florentines were growing tired of the joyless regime. The economy was suffering, and his opponents challenged him to a trial by fire to prove his divine mission, an ordeal he dodged, destroying his credibility. The end came in 1498. Savonarola was arrested, tortured, and forced to confess his prophecies were fake. He and two of his lieutenants were condemned as heretics. They were hanged in the Piazza della Signoria, on the exact spot where the bonfire of the Vanities had burned. Their bodies were then burned, and their ashes scattered in the Arno River to prevent followers from gathering relics. The storm had passed. The Medici were still gone, but the path for their return was now being cleared, paved with the ashes of the man who had brought them down. For nearly 2 decades, the exiled Medici plotted their return. The family's hopes now rested on Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent's second son. Unlike his useless older brother, Giovanni was patient and politically brilliant. He'd been made a cardinal at just 13 and had spent his exile in Rome, quietly building alliances in the papal court. His chance came in 1512. The Florentine Republic had sided with France. Against the powerful Pope Julius II and his Spanish allies, Giovanni seized the moment. Backed by a Spanish army and the Pope's blessing, the Medici staged a coup. The Republican government collapsed, and the Medici brothers marched back into Florence. The Republic was dead. This time, their rule wasn't hidden. It was direct and backed by foreign soldiers. But an even greater prize was just around the corner.
Less than a year later.
In 1513, Pope Julius II died. At the papal conclave, Giovanni de' Medici, through cunning and the power of his family's name, was elected pope. He took the name Leo X. The Medici had reached the absolute summit. They no longer needed to influence the papacy. They were the papacy. At just 37 years old, Leo X reportedly told his brother, "God has given us the papacy. Now let us enjoy it." And enjoy it he did. Leo's court was a spectacle of magnificence, even more splendid than his father's. He was a huge patron of the arts, famously hiring Raphael to decorate the Vatican apartments. He spent fortunes on parties, manuscripts, and music, running the papal treasury dry and plunging it into debt. To fund his lavish lifestyle and the massive project of rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica, Leo X turned to a familiar and controversial source of cash: the sale of indulgences. Indulgence was a way to reduce time spent in purgatory for sins. While not new, Leo authorized their sale on an industrial scale. In Germany, a friar named Johann Tetzel was a particularly shameless salesman, using the catchy slogan, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." This blatant selling of salvation horrified many, but none more than a quiet, intense monk and theology professor in the small town of Wittenberg. His name was Martin Luther. In 1517, deeply disturbed, Luther wrote his 95 Theses, a list of arguments against the sale of indulgences, and, as legend has it, nailed them to a church door. He meant to start a scholarly debate. Instead, he started a revolution. The theses were printed and spread across Germany, tapping into deep resentment against papal authority. Leo X at first dismissed it as a squabble among monks, completely failing to see the danger. He eventually excommunicated while the Medici popes dealt with the firestorm of the Reformation. The family was making another ambitious move to secure its power: royal marriage. This was the next phase of their evolution. They weren't content being puppet masters or even popes. They wanted to put their bloodline on the great thrones of Europe. The key to this was a young woman named Catherine de' Medici. Born in 1519, Catherine was Lorenzo the Magnificent's great-granddaughter. In 1533, her uncle, Pope Clement VII, married her off to Henry, the second son of the King of France. To the French court, she was just the Italian woman, an upstart merchant's daughter with a big dowry. But Catherine had a cunning political mind that was pure Medici. When her husband unexpectedly became King Henry II, she became Queen of France. And after his death, she ruled France for 30 years as regent and queen mother to 3 of her sons. Her rule was during one of the most brutal periods in French history, the Wars of Religion, a savage conflict between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Catherine's survival depended on navigating between warring factions, and her methods were notoriously ruthless. Her name is forever linked to the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, when a wave of Catholic mob violence, likely approved by Catherine, led to the slaughter of thousands of Huguenots in Paris for a royal wedding. Through Catherine, the Medici brand of bloody high-stakes politics was exported straight to the heart of the French monarchy. Back in Florence, the illusion of a republic was finally over. In 1532, with the backing of the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, Alessandro de' Medici was made the first Duke of Florence. The city was now officially a hereditary monarchy. After Alessandro's assassination, power passed to a distant branch of the family and to one of its most ruthless and effective rulers, Cosimo I de' Medici. Cosimo I, who took power in 1537, was a nation-builder. He crushed his rivals, centralized the government, and expanded Tuscany's territory, conquering the rival city of Siena. He created the Ufficialiterally, the offices, to house his new, efficient bureaucracy. In 1569, the Pope named him the Grand Duke of Tuscany, formalizing the Medici transformation from bankers to sovereign nobility. They weren't uncrowned kings anymore. They were dukes. But this new era of dukes also marked the beginning of a long, slow decline. The economic heart of Europe was shifting away from the Mediterranean. The Medici Bank was long gone, and their innovative edge had vanished. Later, Grand Dukes lacked the genius of their ancestors. Some, like Ferdinando II, continued the family's patronage of science, famously protecting the astronomer Galileo Galilei from the Inquisition's worst. But the dynasty's fire was fading. Rulers like Cosimo III, who reigned for over 50 years, were deeply conservative and presided over a period of economic and cultural stagnation. The Renaissance flame, which the Medici had so brilliantly fanned, had dwindled to a flicker. The family that once stood at the center of the world was becoming a sideshow. The end of the Medici dynasty wasn't a bang, but a slow, quiet fade. For centuries, the family had fought, plotted, and married to keep their line going. In the end, they were defeated by biology. The last generation of Medici Grand Dukes failed to produce a male heir. The family tree that had produced popes, queens, and geniuses was withering. The last male ruler, Gaston de Medici, took the throne in 1723. His reign was a sad postscript to his family's epic story. He was intelligent but deeply depressed and reclusive, spending most of his days in bed. When he died in 1737, the direct male line of the Medici was extinguished. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany was passed like a piece of property to the Austrian House of Habsburg-Lorraine. Seemed like the story was over. The Medici palaces and their vast, priceless art collections were now the property of a foreign duke, destined to be sold off and scattered across Europe. But there was one Medici left, one final, brilliant player. Her name was Anna Maria Luisa de Medici, Guillaume Gaston's older sister and the last of her line. A cultured and sharp-witted woman, she had watched her family's dynasty crumble. As the sole heir to the Medici's immense private fortuna collection of art of incalculable value, she knew what was at stake. In one final magnificent act of Medici foresight, she saved it all. Or a family pact. In this legal agreement, she bequeathed the entire Medici collection, every Botticelli painting, every Michelangelo sculpture, every jewel and manuscript to the state of Tuscany. But there was one crucial legally binding condition. Nothing could ever be removed from Florence. The collection had to remain intact for the utility of the public, and to attract the curiosity of foreigners. It was an act of incredible vision. At a time when royal collections were seen as the private property of monarchs, Anna Maria Luisa essentially invented the concept of a nation's permanent cultural heritage. She ensured that the Uffizi, the Pitti Palace, and all the treasures they held would belong to Florence and to the world forever. It was the final and most lasting act of Medici patronage. So why do we remember them? The Medici were more than just bankers. They were innovators who created a new model of power based on capital and culture, not just birthright. They were ruthless politicians who played the game better than anyone. But they were also the godfathers of the Renaissance. They funded the art and ideas that pulled Europe out of the Middle Ages. Their legacy isn't just in the marble of Michelangelo's David or the breathtaking dome that still defines Florence's skyline. Their legacy is the very idea that wealth and vision can shape history. They bought power, they created beauty, and in the end, through the wisdom of their last descendant, they gave it all away. The Medici story is a timeless lesson in power, ambition, and legacy. If you found this dive into the Renaissance fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about the families who shaped our world. Let us know in the comments which Medici figure stands out to you most: the calculating Cosimo, the magnificent Lorenzo, or the cunning Catherine. For a look at another family that built an empire on finance, check out our video on the Rothschilds. Thanks for watching. From farmers to bankers to the godfathers of the Renaissance. From the counting houses of Florence to the thrones of France and the Vatican. The Medici family played the game of power more masterfully and more ruthlessly than almost anyone in history. Their story is a blueprint for ambition and a cautionary tale written in gold and blood. They proved that power can be bought, that beauty can be a weapon, and that a legacy, if managed with genius, can be made to last forever. They weren't born kings, but they showed the world how to rule them. And their magnificent legacy, saved by the last of their name, is a testament to the enduring power of a family that dared to buy immortality.